Now, Discovery Health has released its first real-world data of the effectiveness of the two-dose Pfizer vaccine against the Omicron variant of COVID-19. So far, indications are that the two-dose vaccination was more effective against the Delta variant than it is against the Omicron variant. The company used over 211,000 COVID-19 PCR tests, and 41% of those respondents were jabbed with the Pfizer vaccine. The data also indicates that most of the patients hospitalised for COVID-19 are unvaccinated. The data was collected from the 1st of September to the 7th of December. Now, let's discuss this further. We are joined via Zoom by Discovery Health Chief Commercial Officer, Dr. Ronald Whelan. Dr. Whelan, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you for hosting us. Great to be with you this afternoon.
Dr. Whelan, of course, this is disturbing news for many people. So please unpack this for us. What does this mean? Does it mean that people who took the Pfizer shot will require another vaccine shot? And essentially, what does it mean for those that are unvaccinated?
Well, I think firstly, it's good news in that the vaccines have been designed to reduce severe disease and death primarily. And what we're seeing in our latest data is a 70% reduction in risk of severe disease and death through the Omicron variant infection. You'll know that our data against the Delta variant was 93% effectiveness in reducing severe disease and death. So there has been a slight reduction in that effectiveness. But I think we're very happy with the findings. You'll know that the Omicron variant has seen very severe mutations of the spike protein. There's been lots of concern around the effect of those mutations on vaccine efficacy. And I think the data now out of South Africa and out of Discovery Health has demonstrated that 70% reduction in risk of severe disease and death is still a very good number.
So somebody who is not vaccinated as yet, and we're seeing a lot of those that are currently being administered in hospitals, watching this now is thinking, what's the point then of getting vaccinated if this has now reduced, especially when we talk about the two-jab Pfizer, what does this mean then in terms of vaccinating? How would you convince them that this is still important for them to get that jab?
Well, I think the other interesting insight from our findings is that we're seeing significant reinfection rates in people who are not vaccinated. And we're seeing it to some extent in people who are vaccinated. We call those breakthrough infections, but we're seeing it particularly across unvaccinated populations. And what it's showing us is that prior COVID infection doesn't give you protection or significant protection against the Omicron variant. So that's a very important finding. So you need as much protection as you can get, and the best way to get additional protection is through the vaccines. We now know that the vaccines are both safe and effective. I think the second point I want to make is that the data is on the two-dose Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. We do have booster doses coming due in South Africa during the early parts of January next year. There'll probably be an age-based rollout. What we've seen from the global evidence is that booster doses then significantly enhance the protective effect. So we're expecting that the booster doses will increase this protective effect beyond the 70%, which bodes well for South Africa heading into 2022. But it's absolutely critical, given the high transmissibility of the Omicron variant, together with the high rates of reinfection, that as many people get vaccinated as quickly as possible. That is the quickest way and the most effective way to build immunity against COVID-19 and against the Omicron variant.
Now, probably an important note is that this data that we're speaking about was collected from the 1st of September to the 7th of December. Now, that's the first 3 weeks of the outbreak. So it might change. So what does that mean? Does this mean that we should take these, this data, this information that we're hearing now as preliminary?
Well, I think the first thing to mention is that it is a very big study. So it's the biggest study on Omicron to date. 211,000 PCR tests, as you mentioned in the introduction to this. That's a huge study in clinical terms. You know that the initial studies on the vaccines ran the course of about 40 to 80,000 individuals. This study includes over 200,000 individuals. So very powerful study. As you rightly mentioned, it is a preliminary study. So it is the first 3 weeks of the Omicron outbreak in South Africa. So we will continue to watch this data over the next few weeks. We're going to watch it closely, but we're confident, given the size of the data set at the moment and the extent of the analytics that we've done on this, that the numbers are robust. But we'll obviously continue to watch this closely. We felt a compelling need to communicate these insights both in South Africa as well as globally, given the need for additional knowledge on Omicron.
Dr. Whelan, there's no doubt that the Omicron variant has progressed significantly in the country. In fact, it accounts for 90% of COVID-19 infections. Now, do we know why it is that children are at higher risk of hospital admission with complications during the fourth wave than during the first wave and the second wave?
It is a curious observation we're seeing across our discovery data and across national data. So we are seeing slightly higher admission rates for children in this particular wave compared to previous waves. There are a number of factors to consider in this data. I think the first one is we need to acknowledge that in the main, children have not been vaccinated in South Africa yet. So vaccinations are open to children between the ages of 12 to 17, but children below the age of 12 have not had access to vaccination. So that may be one of the variables at play. What we're also hearing from our hospital colleagues across South Africa is that many children are being admitted to hospital and then being diagnosed with COVID incidentally. So they're being admitted for other reasons and then having a COVID test, which is standard protocol in South Africa, and the test is oftentimes coming back positive for COVID. So that's an incidental admission, and I think it speaks to the general sense that the Omicron variant is producing a milder infection and certainly significant numbers of asymptomatic infections as well. So those are the two data points that may be driving what we're seeing in the increased risk for children. But it's early days on data in relation to the severity around infections around children. And what we're also seeing is that, as with the previous waves, the infections in kids tend to be quite mild and they resolve quite quickly. So we're cautious around the interpretation of increased severity across children at this stage.
Let's look at other admissions now, Doctor. We know that the majority of the people, who are hospitalized, were unvaccinated, as you've also rightfully pointed out. But can you unpack this for us? We know that some of those that were, hospitalized are unvaccinated, as I said, but who exactly are they? What is the composition? Are those people that have underlying, conditions, or are we perhaps also seeing those that, in fact, were vaccinated in the early stages, and I'm talking about the elderly now, whose immunity might have waned, throughout these months?
We're seeing a mix of those factors come into play at the moment. I think the overarching trend we're seeing is that the vast majority of hospital admissions for COVID-19 at the moment are in people who are not vaccinated. So we're seeing about 73 to 80% of people admitted to hospital with COVID-19 are unvaccinated individuals. And what's interesting about that data is when you look at that in high care settings and ICU settings, so those are more severe manifestations of COVID-19, the unvaccinated proportion goes even higher. So 90 to 100% of people in high care and ICU are unvaccinated individuals. And I think that speaks to the protective effect of the vaccines against severe disease in relation to COVID-19. At the same time, I think it is important to point out that we are seeing gradually increasing reinfection risks in older population and concomitant admissions in older populations who've been vaccinated previously that may point to some level of waning vaccine immunity. So we definitely see a little bit of waning immunity over time. We've seen that in the global studies as well. You'll know that we're now 5 to 6 months post the start of South Africa's COVID-19 vaccination program. We started with the over 60s, so those people will likely see some level of waning immunity. So it's not surprising to see increasing infection rates in that category and increasing admission rates in that category. And that's why it's critical that South Africa moves into the booster program as quickly as possible. And we're anxious to get going on boosters. They have now been approved. They will start sometime in January, as indicated by the National Department of Health. It'll likely be an age-based rollout. And our call is for as many people, and particularly older people across South Africa, to get the booster dose 6 months after their second dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Whelan. We really do appreciate it. Discovery Health Chief Commercial Officer, Dr. Ronald Whelan. Of course, this comes after Discovery Health has released its first real-world data of the effectiveness of the two-dose Pfizer vaccine against the Omicron variant of COVID-19. Importantly, what Dr. Whelan is saying is that South Africa needs to start on its booster vaccine as soon as possible, and we're hearing that could be as soon as January.